Hello everyone! In today's video I'm going to talk to you about my process for creating this digital illustration. I hope you'll be able to take away something useful and implement it in your own artwork. I wanted to briefly touch on the topic of the importance of thumbnailing. Now, what is a thumbnail? A thumbnail is a small image representation of a larger image. So it's basically just a minimal sketch that includes just enough detail or shapes to get the point across of what you're wanting to draw. The cool thing about thumbnails is that since they don't take too long to do, you can do multiple thumbnails quickly to work out an idea. I'll usually draw a few until I feel comfortable with moving forward to refining the sketch. The blue sketch you can see in the beginning here is just a photo of one of my thumbnails that I liked and wanted to move forward with. The refined sketch isn't always one drawing, in fact it never really is for me. Oftentimes I will refine the sketch and refine it again and again until I am truly happy with the level of detail in the piece, in the composition and negative space, etc. I don't get caught up in the line quality and trying to make every shape perfect. This is still a sketch after all. I'm not afraid to erase or messily draw on top of an area or add or remove elements in the piece. This is still a planning stage and you should be open to editing your idea. It's much easier to make changes now than after you've already put, loads of time making the piece, only to realize the hand isn't in the right perspective or there's an awkward empty space that you now need to figure out, what to fill the space with without ruining the already established composition. Now we're entering the final line work stage. This is the easy, mindless part of the illustration, as long as the refined sketch is truly refined. The refined sketch serves as a base for the final line work. I take my time and redraw the illustration for what is hopefully the last time, but I still keep an open mind. Sometimes during this stage I'll make an adjustment to the drawing, big or small, as long as it improves the artwork. Usually it's just small additions, like more small leaves or grasses to better fill up an area, or maybe I noticed a major tangent that I didn't catch in the refined sketch phase. So while there are times I make adjustments and additions during this stage, they are minimal and easy to do. I'm gonna say it again, but it's something I like to reinforce a lot. You should never be afraid to make changes to your artwork at any stage of the illustration. I know it might be more of a pain to alter the artwork if you are near finishing it, which is why you should really strive to critique your artwork heavily during the thumbnail and refined sketch phases. But wouldn't you rather, have like a finished illustration that you're happy about, rather than one that you rushed or didn't make that one change you should have, and now you don't like the finished piece as much? And by the way, the images on the left are a mood board I made for this piece. I don't do this often, but it is definitely helpful on more complex pieces or when I need to narrow my focus. I'll incorporate images or elements I want to include, like maybe a certain flower or leaf shape, or even anatomy images. Like here I have a bunch of, tiger drawings and artworks that I liked. If I have a certain color palette in mind, I'll add the swatches here too. Or maybe I see someone else's artwork with colors I really enjoy, and I'll add it to the mood board for something to base my color palette off of. I ended up not going with the blue palette, but you'll hear more about that when we get to the coloring stage. Back to the line work here, I wanted to point out that I'm using a textured brush for all of the line work. This is something that I started doing quite some time ago. I really took an interest to digital drawings or paintings that have a more traditional feel to them, and texture is a good way of bringing that traditional art feel to the piece. I used to only use a hard round brush for line work, and over time I didn't like the very graphic kind of digital look it gave my work. It wasn't until I started paying attention to how other digital artists were creating their artwork that I started noticing most of the artists' work that I liked tended to use texture in their work, and that was oftentimes found in their line work. So I set out trying different brushes but not really finding what I wanted, and ended up seeing some work by Eric Anthony, I'll put his name on the screen, on Instagram, and that he has some brushes for Clip Studio Paint. He had a demo at the time showing his brushes in use, and I immediately loved how his Gifford 6B brush worked. It's a pencil brush. And it looked very natural to draw with and had some really nice texture to it. I believe I got the Real Brushes pack for Clip Studio Paint a couple years ago, but I think now he has a Mega Brush pack for Clip Studio Paint that involves some pencil brushes. It seems he has a load of brushes for Procreate mainly, if that's more your jam. I'd recommend his brushes to anyone wanting a more natural, traditional feel. I literally use that one brush for both sketching and the final line work. It's just that good. I often enjoy sketching digitally using that brush more so than traditionally with either pen or pencil. I know a lot of artists use Kyle's brushes, if you're familiar with him. So I'd look into those as well if you're searching for some new brushes. I just love the simplicity of Eric's. It was a small brush pack and I only use a couple of them. I'm definitely not one who has a need for so many brushes. It's more of an annoyance to me to have to keep changing brushes. So I like to just have one main brush, a default hard round brush for filling in flat colors, and maybe even like a soft default round brush for like subtle effects and such. Once I narrowed down my brushes to that, I found it much more fun to create art. It took the stress out of it because I didn't have to think about what brush to use or remember where it was in the big list of brushes. It just made things easier. Even if you do more painting and less line art based art, I'd still recommend narrowing your brush set. I've seen other artists make a really beautiful portrait painting with only a default round brush to prove a point that more isn't always better. Anywho, let's jump into the coloring process. I have a bit to say, so I'm going to talk about it while you're seeing the rest of the line work being drawn. This is probably the most chaotic step in my process. I've been known to spend way too much time changing colors, and it's something I hope to improve on. There's lots of back and forth and testing different colors, and sometimes during testing a new color, I'll really like a certain one, and then have, other colors that no longer work with the new one, and then I have to go back to changing those colors till it works as a complete image again. Sometimes I have a certain color scheme in mind. For this illustration, you can even see in the mood board in the beginning, I had the idea of a strong blue color palette with a little bit of pink. I didn't show it in this video, but when I tried the blue palette, I didn't feel like it fit with the illustration. After seeing the final line work and noticing there was, lots of plants and the big sun, I changed my focus away from blue to a more natural green and yellow color palette. I knew I wanted the sun to be bold in a yellowish orange that really framed in the focal point, which are the faces of the tiger and the girl. The background is pretty monochromatic, being various shades of greens with a subtle gradient of yellowish towards the top, and something I started doing a while ago was coloring my line art. I used to only do black line art, but when I was getting more into digital drawing, I saw other artists change the color of their line art and loved the effect it gave to the finished illustration. It created a softer look that I always was trying to go for but never really achieved with the harsh black outlines. I still love a good black ink drawing, whether it's traditional ink or like a digital sketch, but in my illustration work I've really grown to love, that more colored line art look. I'll usually keep the line art pretty much one color. It's typically a dark blue or red. In this case it's a muted green, which I don't do too often. As I start to fill in the shapes with color, I'll reevaluate the outline color and see if it's still working, and if it's not, I'll start trying new colors for either the outlines or the filled in shapes. And this is where I'll spend a lot of the time trying new colors. When I think I'm happy with how all the colors are working together, I'll make a new layer above the other layers, including the line art, and I'll fill it in with usually a yellowish or pinkish color, and then I'll start changing the layer mode and really look at how it is altering the feel of the illustration. Typically the layer modes I end up using are overlay, soft light, glow dodge, hard light, and pin light. It really all depends on the overall color of the illustration. For example, something like this piece, which is very green and yellow based, glow dodge or overlay tend to look really good. I'll usually bring the opacity of this layer down quite a bit to around like 10 to 30%. And of course, anytime I add an adjustment layer like this, it might make another color look weird, so I'll have to go back and mess with changing that color till it looks good with the entire illustration. This is really why my coloring process takes so long, making one change which leads to having to change another thing and so on. I usually really enjoy it though, and lately I've come to really liking greens, yellows, and reds. So I'll usually start with a color palette from a previous illustration that I previously really liked, which gives me a really good place to start. It takes a lot of the guessing out, and I can start with something I already know that I'll like, and then make any alterations to better fit the current illustration that I'm working on. So yeah, that's a bit about my digital illustration process. I'd love to know from you what's one thing you learned and one thing you are going to try in your own work after watching this video. And let me know if there's something in particular you'd like for me to cover in a future video as well. Be sure to check out my description on this video for links to my socials, including my shop and Patreon. And thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you guys in the next video. Bye!